Welcome back, students. Here we are on Chapter 8. We're talking about persuasive messages. So much like the bad news message, we're also going to follow the inductive format with the persuasive messages. Why? Because the recipient is going to be resistant to the message. We're trying to get them to buy something or to encourage them to take action on something, and they're going to be resistant. We want them to either to spend money or take action, and so we have to follow the inductive format where we're going to lead up to the main idea. So we're going to talk in this chapter about the AIDA format, attention, interest, desire, and action, and some specific sales strategies for your persuasive messages. 3 learning outcomes here. We're really going to focus primarily on the written persuasive message. You can probably guess that the best way to deliver a persuasive message is face-to-face. You're going to have all your media richness available, all your persuasive tools. For this class, for this assignment, you are going to write a written persuasive message. So your key terms on this chapter really follow the AIDA format. I should also mention there's some good examples of persuasive letters in Chapter 8. So please make sure that you skim that chapter and look at some of those examples before you attempt this week's writing assignment. There's also a good video only of me, not with these lecture slides, with some additional tips on how to do the persuasive letter format. So moving on to this week's topic, persuasive messages. Again, we're going to use the inductive format because the recipient is going to be somewhat resistant to receiving your message. People don't like being sold. People don't like opening up their pocketbooks. So they're already going to be resistant, which means we're going to follow the inductive format, which means we're going to build up to the main idea. And the main idea is getting them to take action, and oftentimes that's a purchase. So the 4 steps are attention, interest, desire, and action. There's an embedded video in this slide that gives you a fun example from the movie Boiler Room of Giovanni Risi trying to sell a doctor some stock. And if you've ever watched Boiler Room, you know that that's a movie about a fake stock broker firm and what happened to all the employees who worked there as a result. But it's a good sales scene. And check that out, and as you're watching this embedded video, ask yourself what type of appeals is he using in this video. And I'll explain appeals here in a minute. So you can click on that video, and if the video link doesn't work directly, the URL is listed directly below that video. So the first step is to get their attention. And let's go ahead and tee up a scenario to kind of help edify us walking through these 4 steps. So let's assume that you're the marketing director for Manpower, Inc. Manpower, Inc. is a company that provides temporary employees. Businesses will oftentimes hire temporary employees to fill the gaps when they need employees. There might be a sudden increase in demand or more customers, and they need to simply have someone to answer the phones, or they might need some data entry if they're a tax company and they have to do all their year-end tax preparation. Or it could be even a company that needs additional labor for light construction or things of those nature. So these temporary employee firms can provide these employees on a short-term basis to companies who have needs when the employee isn't a highly trained, very specialized employee. They can hire these services. So let's assume that you're contacting businesses through a letter trying to get more businesses to use your services. So you're going to write a persuasive letter. And the first thing you want to do in that letter is get the recipient's attention. Who's the recipient? Who are you going to send this letter to? Well, most likely the target audience is who's the decision maker for hiring temp employees in a company. Most likely that's probably an HR manager, human resources manager, or director. So you want to get a list of those people, and you can use something like San Diego Business Journal Book of Lists, which lists all the companies in San Diego and all of the key contacts for different departments in that company. And you get that list of people. So, and then now you're crafting your letter, and you're sending this letter out to these HR managers to promote your temp employee services. And the first paragraph, you want to start out by getting their attention. And the best way to do that is to ask a question. And the question that you want to ask is asking if the recipient has a problem a problem that, by chance, your product happens to solve. So a possible attention-getting opening paragraph in the problem solution format will be something along the lines of, are you tired of constantly recruiting and training new employees only to see them leave after 6 months? Consider Manpower Inc., where you have at-will employees that are pre-trained for a variety of functions. So in the attention paragraph, you want to ask a question, and it relates to how there's a problem that the target audience might have, and your product is the solution. So that's your opening paragraph, getting their attention, problem solution. In the second paragraph, and this might actually be one or more paragraphs, or it could even be a series of bullet points, you're going to build interest. And the most common way of building interest is through making appeals. And the two most commonly used type of appeals in sales messages are logical appeals and emotional appeals. Logical appeals are all about, it's going to save you time, it's going to save you money, things along those nature. Emotional appeals are, it's going to make you look better, it's going to make you be more attractive, it's going to make you feel better about yourself, you're going to feel more powerful and confident. Those are emotional appeals. And most of the marketing messages that we see have a combination of logical and emotional appeals. If it's a more pragmatic, practical product, they're probably going to use a lot more logical appeals. If it's a more emotional-based product, like say perfume, then it'll probably have more emotional-based appeals. So, but marketing tends to use both. They might have some emotional appeals to get your attention, and then logical appeals to help justify you making that purchase. So going back to Manpower Inc., if we're looking at the interest section of our letter, we would want to use a mixture of logical and emotional appeals. A logical appeal would be something along the lines of, hiring Manpower Inc. is going to save you time with your spent on recruiting, interviewing, and training employees. Also, hiring Manpower Inc. is going to reduce your benefit costs. Since our employees receive benefits from our company, you don't have to provide any health benefits to these temporary employees. Those are logical appeals. But perhaps you also want to mix in some emotional appeals. Wouldn't you like to have less drudgery with new hire paperwork? Wouldn't you like to spend more time with your family? So those are examples of emotional appeals. Now, because this is a letter that you're writing to a business, we're probably going to focus primarily on logical appeals. So emotional appeals are more in the realm of consumer products and consumer marketing, but good persuasive messages have a mix of both. All right, so you've got the target audience's attention, you've got their interest through your appeals, and the next step is to actually get them to desire. So here you want to actually provide some evidence of the benefits. One common tactic for providing evidence of benefits is to have testimonies of folks who've had success with your product, or give some examples. Here's some businesses that have had great success with Manpower Inc., right? So providing some evidence of success that others have had by using your product. Attention, interest, we provided some evidence to help build their desire. The last step, the most difficult, is to actually get the customer, the prospect, to actually take action, take the next step. The first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we're asking for the appropriate next step. If you think about Manpower Inc. and they're selling these temp employees, would our closing call to action be something along the lines of, pick up the phone and call our 1-800 number, and if you order 2 temps or more within the first 24 hours, you get 20% off. Is that it's certainly a call to action, but is it the appropriate next step? And if you think about an HR manager who's looking to contractually work with a temporary employee service company, they're probably not just going to pick up the phone and order some temps, right? They're going to want to meet with you. They're going to want to explain what their needs are. I need employees who are trained in data entry specifically. Do you have that? What do they cost? So the appropriate next step is to actually get a meeting. So you want to think about, as you're going for the close, the call to action, what is the appropriate next step? So in this case, your call to action is to actually schedule a meeting. So your action paragraph would be something along the lines of, listen for your phone, I'll be calling you next week to schedule time to meet with you to see how Manpower Inc. can meet your temporary employee needs. Okay, so that's the AIDA format. A few cautionary notes as you are putting together appeals is you want to avoid a couple of things, and you want to avoid overblown language and faulty assumptions. Overblown language is when your sales message starts sounding like a late night cable TV kitchen knife salesman message. You might have some overblown language. Stupendous, amazing, wonderful. Particularly if you're writing to a business, you don't want to use a bunch of overblown language. You don't use a bunch of exclamation points. It's a business selling to another business, so you need to keep it fairly professional and calm. The other thing you want to avoid is what I call faulty assumptions. Faulty assumptions are, if you buy our product, global warming will be solved, or something along those lines. If it was Manpower Inc. and hiring temp employees, you might say something like, hire our temp employees and your sales are sure to increase. Or hire our temp employees and your profits are sure to increase. That's a faulty assumption. You're saying if you do A, you're going to get Z. You have no guarantee that if a company hires your temp employees, that's going to increase the sales of their company. You have no control over that. They're just having employees come in to do a certain task at that company. But that doesn't mean the company's going to increase their sales. It doesn't even necessarily mean that they're going to increase their profits. You might think, well, temp employees, you don't have to pay benefits, and that's less expensive, which would therefore improve their profits. Not necessarily. There's a lot of things that drive the profits of a company. So unless you're certain of the benefit that they're going to receive, be careful of having a faulty assumption. So what would be an appropriate assumption that you could list as a benefit? Something along the lines of, it'll reduce your time spent on hiring and training new employees. It'll give you the ability to preview employees before you decide to actually hire them, to ensure that you can select the best employees. So those are appropriate benefits, but we don't want to use faulty assumptions where we get kind of into overblown language. So follow the AID format and avoid overblown language and faulty assumptions. So persuasion is a highly studied art form, and there's lots to it. Some of it is pretty basic. It starts with you really knowing who your target audience is, what's their unmet need, and what are some objections that might come up as you're trying to sell them your product, and you should anticipate those objections and have some rational and logical responses to those objections. Be clear on what the desired action step is, as I was mentioning with the Manpower Inc. example, and then have a unique selling point, what we call a USP. So what's going to separate you from the sea of sameness out there? So you need to have something as a point of difference that differentiates you from all the other competing products. It doesn't have to be much, but you need to have something that makes you a little bit different. So in the top right of this slide is you have a wonderful video from Robert Cialdini, who's wrote the book The Science of Persuasion. It's a classic, and he studied a bunch of shortcuts that people use to buy things, and this video covers the top 6 shortcuts, basically things that motivate us to buy things, like reciprocity. If somebody does something for you, invites you to a party, then you're going to feel like you need to invite them to your party when you have that. So some salespeople will give you something first and then ask for something later, and the concept of reciprocity will motivate you to want to respond. So go ahead and take a look at that video. And my question for you on this video, once you're done watching it, it's fairly short, is what persuasive shortcut has been effective in persuading you to buy something? For me, in looking at the video and the 6 shortcuts that they top line, I would have to say it's scarcity. They're about to run out of something. It's the last one. We're down to the only 3 remaining if I ever see that on Amazon. Like there's only a few left to ship. then that seems to kind of a short circuit and I have to buy that item. So it's a persuasion tactic that works for me. So go ahead and don't worry about class discussion on this. So that's actually for my regular on-ground class. So going back to attention, the first step, ask them a question, problem, and solution. And these are some other attention-getting techniques that you can use in this slide, like share your personal experience, a startling statement. Some of these work better in a live persuasion situation, like a personal experience. It's going to be tough to write all that out and keep the reader engaged. I remember when I wasn't much younger than you guys and I was finishing college and looking for a job, one of the companies that I interviewed for was Pizza Hut. And I interviewed for a regional marketing manager position. And I didn't really have a lot of experience. So it was definitely a position that was kind of beyond my current level of experience. And the way I sent my resume out was I ordered a Pizza Hut pizza, ate the pizza, and then printed up a resume in the shape of a pizza and put it in the pizza box. And it had some little grease stains and everything. And I FedExed that resume in the Pizza Hut pizza box to the company. And because I knew, you know, when you think about this getting the attention piece, you really have nothing to lose. Until you get the recipient's attention, you're not going to sell them anything. I knew that until I got their attention from all the resumes that they're looking at, I didn't really have a chance of getting an interview. And really for me, the persuasive next step was to get an interview. So I figured take a risk and let's get noticed by sending my resume out in a Pizza Hut box. And they did call me. So they got my resume and they said, you know, nobody's ever sent us their resume in a pizza box before. What a creative idea. You're totally unqualified for this job, but we just wanted to call and tell you thank you for being creative about submitting your resume. So that ended up to one thing, led to another thing, and I ended up working for Jack in the Box through some of those connections. So you never know. You're planting seeds. You're never going to know where they're going to land. But I use that story just to give you license to try to get attention. You want to do it in a professional way, but you're trying to get their attention. So that's your starting point. Here's just two examples of attention-getting openers. You can see that first version is really leaning more on emotional appeals, whereas the second version is really leaning more on logical appeals, right? So take a minute, pause the video, read those through. After we get their attention, we move on to interest. So again, what I mentioned earlier is you want to avoid, in that second to last bullet point on this slide, overblown language and faulty assumptions. If you keep saying, it's the best, or, you know, I think our current president, politics aside, I think some folks take issue with his language around his constant hyperbole around being the best and everybody loves him. And that type of overblown language can really trip you up when you're trying to sell somebody something. So data and comparisons are good, but overblown language and faulty assumptions are bad. Attention, interest, moving on to desire. So these are some standard tactics for creating desire. You can have testimonies, you can have a guarantee or a free trial, which is going to motivate them to try the product, or you can provide some samples as we go to Costco and we see the lady handing out the yummy mini sausage samples and we go back and change our hat and have our friend go get another one for us, whatever it takes. So these all create desire for a product. And think about our modern day online experience. Where are we getting testimonies now? Well, certainly online reviews are automatic and there and accessible. So Yelp reviews and Google reviews, it's so easy for us to check reviews before we buy something, which is why businesses are so hyper-focused on those online reviews. Price. How do we position the price? This is a larger topic that if you're interested in this, you can take my marketing class and we can go deeper into this and all the different types of pricing strategies that exist. But you don't talk about the price out of the gate. First, you want to create a desire for the product. And by subordinating the price, you mean you make the price as small as possible. So instead of saying, here's the total cost for an annual subscription, you would say, this subscription only costs you 25 cents a day, right? So you can put it in a daily cost or a weekly cost. So you want to try to state the price in small units. You can compare how your product is less expensive than competitors' products if you're a lower price product than theirs. And I remember one of my strategies when I was a marketing manager at Petco, and part of my job was to hire marketing coordinators and place them in the different regional offices across the US. And so we were building this regional marketing department from zero, and I ended up hiring 10 regional marketing coordinators. So a lot of resumes, a lot of interviews, and my boss, the VP of marketing, had the ultimate say on who we hired, but I would screen them and recruit them and kind of thin it down to my top 3. And inevitably, the best candidate, the one that I wanted to hire, was oftentimes the one that had the most experience. And those that had the most experience, inevitably, tended to be more expensive. They had more experience, and so they were going to cost a little bit more money. So what I would commonly do is I would save the best interviewer for last and the best candidate for last. So I would have my boss meet the first candidate, typically somebody young without a lot of experience, and then another decent candidate, and then the one who I felt was the best candidate, I would have them be the final interview. And most times my boss would fall in love with that third person, and then I would talk about their salary afterwards. So, all right, so we want to hire Emily. She's currently making X at the company she's at. She's a little bit outside of our pay range. And my boss would always say, all right, we'll figure it out. We will expand her title. We will whatever it was. So I never would start out by talking about how Emily's more expensive because he wouldn't even interview that person in the first place. So it's a lesson in how we have to subordinate the price. We don't lead with the price. Then we want to motivate action. So again, we have to think, what is the appropriate next step? With that Manpower Inc. example I was talking about, it's not to close the sale right out of the letter. It's very rare that you would do that with a straight letter, but it's to get them to take the next step. Do they have to call a 1-800 number? Do they want to order a free sample? Or are they going to a website to get a free trial of something? Whenever I interviewed at a company, I would always try to close with an action-oriented close. Thank you for your time. If you hire me, you won't be disappointed. And listen for your phone. I'm going to be contacting you next week to see if we can schedule a time for an interview. So that thanks for your time. If you hire me, you won't be disappointed was my close in the interview, asking confidently for the action, your 4th bullet point here. If it was a cover letter that I was sending out with my resume attached and I'm just trying to get the interview, then my closing action paragraph on that cover letter would be something along the lines of, listen for your phone, I'll be calling you next week to see if we can schedule an interview, versus a common closing that many people use in their resume cover letter, which is, thank you for your time, I look forward to the opportunity to be part of the ABC company, or I hope to hear from you for an interview. It's a little meeker, so my point was like, listen for your phone. I'm going to call you next week to see if we can schedule time for an interview. So I've already bought myself an opportunity to call them and try to get an interview. And it shows a little bit more assertiveness. So you want to be pleasantly persistent. You don't want to be overly aggressive and rude, but pleasantly persistent. Okay, here's a couple of examples of action closings from your textbook. So both of these are decent. Again, one of them is more emotion-based, the first one, and the second one has a little bit more logical closing pieces to it as well. So check your book. There's several different examples there. Most importantly is make sure that your prospect who's getting your letter has everything they need to act on your offer. You wouldn't want to write a beautiful persuasive sales letter and forget to give them your 1-800 number or your website or your email, whatever it is that you need them to close. So make sure they have everything